sharing, and I hope now you can see the slide, the PPT. And in the past two classes, we discussed text, textuality, and discourse, and we looked at what is textuality and how a text can attain textuality, the dictionary meaning of a text, and the etymology of the word text, and how it is associated with Latin roots. We also saw that where can we find the text, and the answer is we find the text in context. Then when we look at text, textuality, and discourse, then we have also seen the interrelatedness, interconnection between literature, language, and linguistics. And we have seen that how literature is secondary and language primary. This thing we have seen, and we have also seen that why linguistics is called the meta language, because linguistics is the language used about language. So these are the things that we have seen. Then we also looked at how a text is woven, how text is knitted, and we have looked at it from Saussurean point of view, and the two terminology, the two semantic relations, syntagmatic and paradigmatic. We applied these relations to Shakespeare's sonnet, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And we have seen that how these two lines they have this syntagmatic and this paradigmatic relationship. This is just an example, but we know that any text that is structured, or the text that is woven, must have syntagmatic and paradigmatic relationship. We have also seen that syntagmatic and paradigmatic relations, they are on two axes, and syntagmatic is the horizontal axis, whereas paradigmatic is the vertical axis. We have also seen that paradigmatic relation is a relationship of contrast and substitution, whereas syntagmatic relation is the relationship of combination and co-occurrence restrictions. And we have also seen that these relations are applicable at sound level, at word level, a syntactic level, and stylistic level. So it's not the case that you will find these relationships only at syntactic level, or more at morphological level or at phonological level, but at least uh, you will find them at a stylistic level as well. So we can say that these two relations, these two semantic relations, are found in language. The language is structured, or language becomes meaningful, because there is a play of these two relations, the paradigmatic relation and the syntagmatic relation. So this is a theoretical viewpoint posited by Ferdinand de Saussure in his book written in 1916, The Course in General Linguistics. This provides uh, us a theoretical background when we look at text, textuality, and discourse. Now, when we look at syntagmatic and paradigmatic relationship, it is also beneficial for us to understand the concept of sign posited by Saussure. And as we know that Saussure gave preference to word than the individual sound. And why is it so? Because individual sound unit does not correspond to any anything meaningful. For example, if I say pa, since you have studied linguistics, so you know the nature of the sound pa. You can say that pa sound is bilabial, it is plosive, and it is voiceless. But otherwise, if you can't refer to anything that's there in the world to sound pa. So that is one issue. And when we take a word in contrast to sound, and if I say pen, then you can at least refer to something, either an object, a concrete object, or a concept that is there associated with the word. So this is because of this particular reason, Saussure gave preference to morphology. Morphology that is uh, a larger unit than a sound segment. So when Saussure says sign, so roughly you can understand sign means a word. Any word, it can be a content word or a grammatical word. For example, R, A-R-E. R is a grammatical word, but you know R is auxiliary. Fine, plural auxiliary in the present tense that you have. So a paper, a paper is a concrete object that you can refer to it. So you can say what's a paper, and you can refer to something that is very concrete. But if there is a word like then a or is an article, but you can't refer to it, but you know it's a grammatical thing and where to use it. So similarly, when I talk about sign, and when Saussure says that everything depends upon relations, and what is the meaning of this? Everything depends upon relations. That means one sign is in relationship with other sign, and likewise. So it goes on. So this chain is never ending. So there is a relation. There is a relation between two signs, and because of this relation, there is an interaction. And this, because of this interaction, sign becomes meaningful. Sign gets its meaning. And when we talk about the nature of the sign, then we know that a sign is like a piece of paper, and one side is the signifier and other side is the signified. So these are also conceptual issues. Signifier is the mental sound image that you have, and signified is the concept, mental concept associated with that particular sound. So for example, if I say tree, and when I pronounce tree, then there is a combination of three sounds, t, r, e, and these sounds are combined and pronounced together, tree. So this tree, you can hear this sound, you can perceive this sound, but again, Saussure says that this sound is a mental construct. That is a signifier, but it's a mental construct. If I do not pronounce this, and if I write it on a piece of paper, then again it is a mental construct. So what is actually a mental construct? That is, those sounds are already inscribed in your brain. So when I say tree, you understand that it is a meaningful sound, and it refers to something that has a trunk, leaves, fine greenery. So all such things are associated with that. So this is a signifier, is also a mental construct. And when I say tree, then the image of a tree, any tree, that comes into your mind. It can be a banyan tree, fine, or it can be any other tree, an oak tree, fine. So any tree that comes, that image that comes into your mind, that is the signified. So for the same signifier, you can have many signifieds. For example, if I say bird, then lots of birds are associated with this signifier. So it can be a pigeon, it can be a parrot, it can be a crow, and it can be a penguin even. But again, the first image that comes into your mind is of that particular bird that you find in your vicinity. So uh, penguin is also a bird, but no one will think of penguin. you will think of a crow, you will think of a sparrow, you will think of let's say a parrot or a pigeon. So this is how this entire thing uh, goes on, and language works. Now, in continuation, how text is constituted, we have also seen that starting from phoneme, that is the minimal meaningful sound unit, and reaching to a sentence, you have a single sound combines with more sounds. Then you have the concept morpheme, and then you have one morpheme or more morpheme, then you have a word. Then you combine more words, then you have phrases and clauses, and then you have a sentence. The difference between a clause and a sentence is that in a sentence you can have more than one subject. You can have more than one subject and predicate, and a sentence has a complete meaning. Whereas when it comes to clause, then the meaning is not complete. So this is how things are associated. But in certain cases, like when there is only a simple clause, then one simple clause can also be understood as one sentence. So here you have example of the bats harbor viruses. This is again an example of a clause. So here you find that it gives complete meaning, that the bats harbor viruses. It gives complete meaning, but still there is only one subject and one predicate. But in a sentence, you can have more than you can have more than one sentence. Sorry, one subject and predicate. For example, here you have two subjects, like it is proved. This is one clause, that the bats harbor virus. Now, that the bats harbor virus is a relative clause here. So again, in a sentence, you can have more than one subject and predicate. So this is the difference between clause and sentence. But this slide focuses on how text is constituted, and you can see very clearly that, and very systematically, we have started from a minimum, that is one sound, a phoneme, and we are reaching to a sentence. Now but when we talk about a text, then we are talking about more sentences, more than one sentence. So that means we are looking at something that is beyond sentence. And what is something beyond sentence? uh, then we are at least moving towards a discourse. Now here you have one example from Halliday and Hassan, and this example is published in the book titled Cohesion in English. And what is this example? This example is wash and core 6 apples, put them in a bowl. Now there are two sentences, because you know that the punctuation and the capitalization tells you that uh, an English sentence starts with a capital letter and ends with a full stop, and that full stop can sometimes be a mark of interrogation, or it can be mark of imperative, and here it is a period. So a full stop, this dot, is also known as period in American English. Now but that is not interesting. What is interesting is the cohesive relations across sentence boundaries. And here you find that them is an anaphor, and the meaning of this anaphor is not clear if you are not crossing the sentence boundary. So put them in a bowl, and if you are not moving from this sentence to the previous one, then you will never get to know what is them here. So what you are doing, actually, you are in search of the antecedent, and antecedent provides the meaning. to an anaphor. So this anaphor, since this anaphor is not getting its meaning in the sentence, then this anaphor is in search of its meaning, and six apples is giving its meaning to them. So this is how six apples is equal to them here, and there is a cohesive relation between these two. And because of this cohesive relation, there is a cohesion. So this cohesion is a concept, and through this cohesive relation, you have this cohesion. At the same time, you also know that imperative sentences in English are subjectless, and here wash and core six apples. Here you is missing, like you wash and core six apples. It's a direction, it's an instruction. You put them in a bowl, but you is missing here. So this is also the thing, but this subject is recoverable. This is recoverable from the context. So you know, like you is omitted. You is the elliptical object here, uh, and that subject is missing. So this is how you can draw you can draw the meaningfulness of a text, and how text reaches its textuality. So but at the same time, when we look at simply the etymology of this word text, and there is we find a verb texture in Latin, and the meaning of this word texture is to weave. Now you must have seen people weaving sweaters. You must have seen people weaving cloth. What is so special about knitting a sweater, or let's say weaving a cloth? That is coherent, like integrated. So you have something that is very coherent. So it's not the case like there is one thread missing. If there is one thread missing, or there is even one thread uneven, then you can very easily find that there is some problem, a problem in the knitting, there is some problem in the weaving. So this is one thing. But when it comes to text, when it comes to something that is printed or that you read, uh, let's say black and white or on the virtual screen, that that is specific, that is specificity is somehow missing. So when I say that this specificity is somehow missing, because language is creative, and we language speakers, we very often play with the language. And how do we play with the language? We have these examples here. So the other day I was also discussing with you that you greet me good morning, and I say Tolstoy, War and Peace. Now again, Tolstoy, War and Peace is like a phrase that you have, a possessive phrase. Your Tolstoy, like Tolstoy is the author, and War and Peace is the novel. But that knitting, that weaving is not good. You will say, what does it mean? I greeted you good morning, and you are answering Tolstoy, War and Peace. What does it mean? But if you know the context, that okay, um, uh, you borrowed this text from me 2 weeks back, and continuously I'm reminding you to return it back, Tolstoy's War and Peace, and you are not returning it. So once you greet and I say Tolstoy's War and Peace, that means like I give a damn to your good morning, and I'm more concerned about Tolstoy's War and Peace. So please give me my book. So that means only this coherence between words or grammaticality in a sentence, that is not important. But more important is the context in which a particular text occurs. Similarly, a road sign stop. Now this is stop, and it's a road sign. It's very much meaningful. If you are driving and if you see this sign stop, you know that like it's an indication that I must stop driving. Similarly, this particular example, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, provided by given by Noam Chomsky in his book Syntactic Structures, published in 1957. You find this sentence is perfectly grammatical. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Furiously, an adverb, and you know that adverb they add to something to the verb, uh, and you know ideas noun, and colorless green ideas, like this is a subject and verb, sleep, and you know sleeping is intransitive verb. Intransitive verbs, they won't require an object, but adverb can add to them. So this is perfectly grammatical, but this is not acceptable, because ideas, they do not have any color. This practical knowledge that you have, and this practical knowledge extends to that if there is some color, let's say green, then green cannot be colorless, or color cannot be colorless. So self contradiction. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So ideas cannot sleep. Even when you are sleeping, then you can have an idea, and even if you are sleeping, then you can sleep calmly, peacefully, nicely, but you can't sleep furiously. So this is not acceptable meaning wise. So this is grammatically okay, grammaticality wise fine, but it is not acceptable, and you know why it is not acceptable. So again, the context. By these three examples, we can find that context plays a crucial role in order to ascertain the meaning of the text. So the internal knitting in a phrase, internal knitting in a sentence is one thing, but other thing is the context. The context is more important than the internal knitting, internal weaving of a text. So this is how we have seen this. And to move further, when we question that how a text transforms into a discourse, so we can say that Tolstoy's War and Peace is a text, road sign stop is a text, colorless green ideas sleep furiously is a text. But if the context is not knowable, if the context is not known, then the text remains text, but text does not transform into discourse. So a text must realize into context, and not only any context, but knowable context. And taking this point, taking a cue from this point, Mikhail Bakhtin defined discourse as concrete living totality. Now, what is this concrete living totality? Concrete living totality is when something is said, when you read something, then you try to find out the meanings associated with that particular text, with all the knowledge that you have of language. So firstly, you will go for the grammatical knowledge. Then secondly, you will go for allusions. Allusions. What is allusion? So you have another similar word, illusion. So but I'm not talking about illusion, but I'm talking about allusion. Allusion is references, like past references. You try to find out how this thing is related to my past knowledge. So lots of permutation and combinations at the same time occur in your mind, and you try to find out the best possible meaning associated with that particular text. You are already reading a text and one new paragraph introduces, then obviously you look for the past story or past thing that is associated. But at the same time, you can associate it with different text. Okay, previously also some author has said this thing, previously also some poet has said this thing. So that type of associations, that type of permutation and combinations you make in order to make that particular text more knowledgeable, and you want to transform that particular text into discourse. So all the time this thing functions in your brain, and this thing functions so quick, so fast, that you are not aware of that this is happening, but this is actually happening. For example, when you are talking, then you are not actually aware of that you are talking, because this process is so fast. You need not to think of the grammar, you need not to think of many other things that are associated with the act of talking, speaking. But when you are writing something, then you are much conscious, because writing is a slow process. You write a word, you write a word in a few seconds, or like a couple of seconds, and you think of like, okay, whether the spelling is correct or not. But these things, because speaking is so instant, so quick, that you miss these processes, like these things. So this is how you transform a text into a discourse, and you make use of concrete living totality that is there, posited by Bhaktin. This term, I have a liking for this term, concrete living totality. Like, it's like the best definition of a discourse I have found yet. Now, another things that are associated with text context is, uh, and there is a question, in fact, can text be decontextualized? So you have a word text, you know what is text. Now you have a word like context, now you know what is a context, something that comes before and after, that is after a text is context. But I'm talking about decontextualized. That means you are removing a text from a context. Now this entire process, removing a text from a context, is known as decontextualization. So my question is, can text be decontextualized? And the answer is yes. So here we have an example from Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. Now, Alchemist is a very fine book. You can read this book in one day, in like a couple of sittings, and very lucid language you find in. And basically, this book is considered as the motivational books, uh, where it says that if you desire something wholeheartedly, then the entire universe will conspire for you, so that you can meet the desired element, the desired thing that you have. This is the essence of this book. Otherwise, everything is very well knitted in a form of a story. Lots of metaphors are there, and many management courses, they also use this book as a textbook. This entire thing, so many metaphors, and an interesting read, that I must say. So I have taken this one first example. The boy's name was Santiago. Now, this is the first sentence. Now, what I have done, this particular sentence, this is the first sentence I know, because consciously I picked this sentence from the book, and what I have done, I have pasted here on this slide. Now, this pasting is also a form of decontextualization. That means I have picked that particular thing and pasted it here. Why I did that thing? Because I want to teach you decontextualization. What is decontextualization? But at the same time, you are teaching this novel to someone, and you want to use the simple short sentences used in this book, particularly The Alchemist. Then you can also quote this sentence. So this entire quoting thing, this entire thing associated with citations, that is again the part of decontextualization. So the answer is yes. text can be decontextualized. But when you decontextualize a text, that decontextualized text must occur in a contextualized situation. It's not like again you are greeting me good morning, and I say the boy's name was Santiago. So that decontextualization is outside context, and again it will become meaningless. So this is the essence, that even the decontextualization must occur in a contextualized situation, that you need to keep in mind. Now, when we talk about text, context, and discourse, now you know very well that what is a text, what is a context, and what is a discourse. There is a theoretical viewpoint by Stanley Fish that is also important when we study text, context, and discourse. So there is an anecdote, and what is that anecdote? That once a student came to Fish and asked, "Is there a text in this class?" Now, the commonsensical understanding is text means reading material. So, likewise, Fish Fish answered that, okay, we have this book, we have that book, we have this book, you can read that also. But again, the student uh, interrupted and said, no, 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 that is not the case. Is there a text in this class? So now then Fish understood that the student is not asking about the reading material, a student is not asking about the reading text, but the student is asking about whether we are going to take some theoretical viewpoint in this class or not. So what is the sense of this story? The sense of this story is that we have a linguistic utterance, and each linguistic utterance is open to many interpretations. I'm going to a bank. If I say I'm going to a bank in the daytime, then the meaning is, okay, I'm going to a financial institution. But considering that I'm living in a city where there is also a river, and in the night or in the evening, if I say, let's say I'm going to the bank, then the meaning will be I'm going to a river bank and not to a financial institution, because you know that these banks, these financial institutions, they function during the office time, and office time is 10 to 5. So this is again, like, one word is open to many interpretation. uh, any linguistic utterance that is open to many interpretation. Now the question arises, there are many interpretations of a linguistic utterance, but are all interpretations valid? That means, is there a text in this class cannot be cannot be the meaning that the student is asking for, that will you provide us snacks and cold drink. So this is, you can interpret it like, is there a text in this class, and you can say text here means snacks and cold drink, but this is not a valid interpretation. So Stanley Fish talks about interpretive communities. That means where we have interpretive communities, that is they certify that these meanings are associated with this particular text, with this particular linguistic utterance, and only these linguistic utterances are meaningful, and rest of them are not meaningful. So everything or every interpretation is not valid, or every meaning is not valid meaning. As a reader, as an audience, you can associate with many meaningfulness, but at the end of the day, what interpretive communities they think about the validity of a particular meaning will actually work. So again, Stanley Fish states that meanings are already conditioned by the situation in which it was uttered. Now, this is said by Fish. It is important that meanings are already conditioned by the situation in which it was uttered. That means if there is a linguistic utterance, then when I said that when you try to find out the meaning, then a totality, living totality, concrete living totality that you have. So you have this combination, permutation, what are the possible meanings? What are that? That is basically situations. So you try to make fit a particular linguistic utterance in all the situations that are associated with that. So what is the meaning of this statement by Fish, that meanings are already conditioned by the situation in which it was uttered, means the knowledge, the knowable context transform text into discourse. Again, the situation is what? Situation is again a knowable context. You know that this thing, something that is said, can be associated with these situations and not outside these situations. Similarly, what Stanley Fitch said is also echoed with Wittgenstein's this famous statement from philosophical investigation. And what is that? The meaning of a word is its use in the language. That means if you read a word in isolation, it has no value, it has no meaning. The meaning of a word is its use in the language. But if you use a word in a language, in a situation, then that particular word becomes meaningful. So similarly, why it is always discouraged to learn words in isolation. Like you must have done this thing previously in your uh, uh, few years back, that this is the word and the meaning of this word is this. This is the word and the meaning of this word is this. But what Wittgenstein is saying, that this is a futile activity. Even if you learn a word in isolation, it has no meaning. So that means a word is meaningful when it is used in the language. And when I say something is used in a language, then I am talking about the use in the sentence that I am particularly focusing on. But at the same time, I said that we can have a signifier, and a signifier has more than one signified. Example is bank. Now, bank is a signifier. One meaning is a financial institution, another meaning is a river bank. So similarly, you have bat. Now, bat is a playing tool that you have used in cricket, and bat is also a mammal that you have that is responsible for the spread of COVID-19. So now when one signifier is associated with many signifieds, then the question arises, what protects us against the indeterminacy of signifiers? So this is like indeterminacy. That means like you have so many meanings that are associated with signifiers, but how can you ascertain that, okay, no, only this signified is associated with this signifier? Again, the answer you know, and we have discussed that the situation, the context is there. But what Stanley Fish says, what promises us the ability to have common meaning is that there is always a contextual setting, and the sign of its presence is precisely the absence of any reference to it. So we have a contextual setting. There is no problem in understanding this phrase, a contextual setting. There is always a contextual setting. So when we say something, there is always a contextual setting that we have. And the sign of its presence, so that the sign of of a contextual setting is precisely the absence of any reference to it. So this is like a very fine play of words. The sign of its presence. That means the contextual setting is already there, but it is not already there when I speak. It is not already there when I write. Then it is it is precisely the absence of any reference to it. So even like I am not mentioning contextual setting, but I know that this contextual setting, I'm not giving any reference to it. When I say I'm going to a bank, then I'm not giving any reference to it, but you already know that the reference is in your mind. This is the meaning here, that the reference is already there. The reference is absence, but reference is also presence. So this is like a fine contradiction that you have. And this is how fish talks about how situations they are important, how situations are important in order to transform a text into a discourse. This is again quite important that we have. So I stop here. I stop here, and if you have any doubt, then you can ask me.